Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. With this video, I'll be reviewing the campaign adventure Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen, designed by Wizards of the Coast and adapted to Roll20. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. I've mentioned for years and years how I'm not actually terribly familiar with the Forgotten Realms, despite that being the main campaign setting of D&D 5th edition. Although I think I can't really say that anymore because I've been running D&D 5e games and playing in 5e games almost since 5th edition has been around, so that's well over half a decade at this point. And honestly, I've been familiar with Forgotten Realms and the Sword Coast through games like the Baldur's Gate series, Neverwinter Nights, and maybe even some Gold Box games in the 90s, so that's probably not always entirely true. My point, however, whenever I say this, is that while I wasn't very connected with the outside lore for Forgotten Realms, I was very plugged into Dragonlance. Dragonlance was my drug of choice for fantasy. Like most folks, The Hobbit actually got me into fantasy, and then Lord of the Rings that I read as a youngin', but I devoured Dragonlance, and I was late to the party. I believe the first trilogy was actually published in the 80s, and it wasn't until like the mid to late 90s that I started reading the books, and then I just started reading every single Dragonlance book I could get my hands on, no matter who the author was or what the setting or whatever it was. They published so many books over the course of whatever it was, like 20 years, that I definitely did not read all of them. I maybe didn't even read half of them. I'm not sure. I still have a bunch of books on my shelf, but point being, I very much enjoyed that world. It was a very classic high fantasy, swords and sorcery, heroic, epic fantasy. And the main thing it had going for it for a good chunk of the eras were these massive, big, like global wars that took place with, entire, dragons and these unique creatures called Draconians, which was the original War of the Lance, where the original trilogy takes place. And then different, wars and cataclysms would happen over the years that kind of reset the world and all these other things. But it really felt like this dynamic, like you had to go into certain eras and things, and it felt just really, really cool. It was all very character-based. It was very much a superhero-type world where all the characters were very big and famous and just, felt like proper high-level adventurers existing in that world. And now we had this awkward part where we didn't see a Dragonlance book published for like 10 years, and now suddenly it's back. I believe they had their first book was published in late 2022, and then of course right in December of 2022 we got an official 5th edition campaign, which is Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. And I'm very pleased to tell all of you that this is a damn good campaign adventure, probably the best one that I have read possibly since Tomb of Annihilation, which I think Tomb is easily like a top 3 in if we just look at the official 5e campaign books. I think Tomb is easy at top 3. Dragonlance, to me, just having read it, obviously not having seen anybody played it or designed it myself or anything, I think it got to be top 5. And it's not. It takes place in Krynn. Like, this is not in the Forgotten Realms at all. So I really didn't know what to expect for them, how to handle it. And it turns out it takes place right at the beginning of basically the first trilogy of books. In fact, I'm not sure where exactly it fits in the timeline, other than it's the War of the Lance is basically starting, or is kind of has reached basically the western half of the continent, which I think is when the very first book begins. But I believe the first book takes place in the southern half, kind of the southwestern half of the continent, and spans kind of the southern half. And this campaign book kind of features more the northern half. So it's a clever way of saying, hey, we're setting this during the classic time of the original novels, but we're not really going to run into any of the continuity issues and run into any of the main characters and things, which is totally fair. I think if you were hoping for a source book on Krynn and Ansalon and coming into it going, well, I don't know why people care about this setting, like what makes it different, like sell me on this world. I think the adventure itself can sell itself, but I think if you were hoping to like run your own campaign in this world, I don't think this actually does a great job of that. The entire source book part is before the first chapter. It's literally like 20 pages, and half of those pages are talking about the Pantheon, like the gods, which have been absent from this world for hundreds of years, and only now at the start of this new series and the start of this campaign are they starting to trickle back. Unfortunately for everybody, it basically begins with Takhisis, who is the evil queen of dragons. And yeah, she is literally the same figure as Tiamat in the Forgotten Realms. And she's kind of the first one that comes back and basically gets the ball rolling with trying to conquer everybody. And now all of a sudden all the other gods start trickling back and being able to fight back in more subtle and weaker ways, but it's mostly up to heroes to handle everything. But if you were looking for an adventure, just a great adventure, and be an adventure in Dragonlance setting, this is absolutely awesome. And I would highly recommend it if you're only going to watch this video for just a couple of minutes. It gets me a super thumbs up, but I will dive into what all you're going to get in this Roll20 bundle, what it looks like, and I will actually go into the intricacies of why I like this adventure, what it does really well, and also some criticisms for it and where I think it falters. So if you are a player looking at playing in this campaign, including, I'm going to go ahead and tell my players right now, probably don't watch this review because there is a good chance this is going to be in the running for the next campaign I could run. So maybe don't watch this because I will get into some spoiler stuff. Maybe you can watch the pros and cons at the end, although I'm probably going to get a little bit spoilery towards that. But at least know that from this opening little bit from me that I am very, very thumbs up and very positive on this campaign and adventure in a way that I don't think I've been since probably Rime of the Frostbane was the last time. I'd have to go back and look at the review for like a really positive campaign. But we've had Journeys of Radiant Citadel, which I thought was really good, but that was, you know, an anthology of adventures. It wasn't a complete campaign adventure. If we just look at, you know, layer books that have been very good, but if we really look at just complete campaign adventures, this is just one of the best I think we've seen out of 5e. All right, so what do you get with the Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen Roll20 bundle, which is worth $29.99 on Roll20? You get the full level 1 through 11 campaign and all 7 chapters that are organized into the journal, as well as they actually do an interesting thing here. I'll go ahead and talk about this now. So instead of putting that weird opening, it's not even a chapter, it's just called like the War of Krynn, or War Comes to Krynn section, which is literally only 20 pages long. Instead of putting that in the journal, like organized in its own section, they just give you hyperlinks to parts of where it is basically in the compendium in Roll20. So you just kind of get this pop-up window. That's not necessarily bad, I guess, and it probably saves a lot of work when it came to adapting it to Roll20 because somebody didn't have to, you know, do the work of putting it as individual handouts, which is fine. I guess it's all DM information, but just know that that stuff is there, and it's really important. At least this first half, you don't have to go into the gods necessarily too heavily, but certainly the history and things are only a couple pages, but it's really important to know for the context of this world, and those are presented in here through hyperlinks. And then chapter 1, character creation, which weirdly, I guess they did this as a way of saying, well, people are going to wonder why we start with chapter 2, because chapter 1 is the character stuff. That is also included in these little pop-up windows for hyperlinks, and you kind of have to hyperlink your way through it. So on the one hand, I can see why it would be annoying not to have that information in the journal, but on the other hand, technically none of this is adventure stuff, so we could leave that as pop-outs. But I think this is the first time I've seen Roll20 actually do this, where they just straight up said, you know what, if it's not explicitly campaign and adventure stuff, we're just going to include hyperlinks where you can find all the information. And some of them you may have to do a drop-down menu. So for example, when I clicked on the new race options, I have to actually go to Dragonlance before it shows the Kender stuff. So just kind of a note on that in case you have multiple stuff purchased in Roll20, you may have to use that drop-down menu. You also get 7 regional, so I'm going to talk about the maps real quick. 7 regional maps and 19 5-foot square scale battle maps, all of which have dynamic lighting. So I'm also pleased to say at the beginning of this review, and I'm going to start spoiling things because I'm going to open this page toolbar, which you're going to see all the maps. Full color detailed map art. Oh, it feels so good. I love it so much. Let's see, credit wise, I'd have to pull up, I believe it's Mike Schley. Let's see, Mike Schley and Jared Blando for our map art, and it is fabulous. I will show this map art a little bit deeper into the review, but it's awesome. It's probably the best map art I've seen since Tomb of Annihilation. It's incredible, and we get a pretty good amount. Like I said, 19, and they're all 5-foot scale battle maps, which are a problem that we have with other campaigns. Most recently with my Realm of the Frostmaiden campaign, sometimes the maps were like 10-foot scale, and it looks really weird. You have to like zoom in, and everything's just with the huge boxes and stuff. Now they do an interesting thing here. If we click on, it's a battle map scale, where some of them have been scaled to half distance. So they're called extra large 5-foot maps, and I'll show you what that means. But essentially, some of them that are really big, they're still 5-foot scale battle maps, but they've been halved size-wise, so it still kind of looks teeny tiny. That's not necessarily a pro or a con. I can see why they wanted to do that, because giant maps in Roll20 can be an issue because the players are scrolling all over and the DM has to scroll a lot over. I'm dealing with that right now in one of my later big dungeon maps in Rime of the Frost Maiden. On the other hand, I know that tiny tokens are very annoying, and that is a fix you can take where you can basically just double everything, but then you'd have to manually fix all the dynamic lighting stuff yourself because it's all scaled to that. So I'll show you how that works, but that is kind of a footnote on the 5-foot map scale, is that yes, some of them are that, but some of them are large and they have been reduced to half size. But otherwise, the maps are very, very good. Now, of course, we don't have maps for everything. There's random encounter stuff. We don't have maps for various a few adventure locations that probably need a map. There are some wonderful resources you can look for. In fact, DM's Guild has one from Tessa Moorcroft called Tessa Presents 94 Maps for Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen for $9.99. I think that's an easy DLC pickup for me. If you're going to run this on a VTT, just having those maps available is really, really handy. But we also get a lot of great maps here and some pretty solid regional maps as well. We also get over 70 NPC character sheets and tokens, which are in this section right here. These are the so over 70 of the regular ones and then 30 named NPC tokens. That's actually probably on the low end of how many tokens and creatures you get. So in terms of creature variety, you may not see as many as some other campaigns of the same length. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of the enemies you're fighting are part of this evil army, which is the Red Dragon army, and most of those forces are kind of the same couple stat blocks. Now, normally this would be problematic, but one of my big pros for this campaign is that Draconians are freaking awesome as villains. There's, I believe, 5 or 6 different types. They're all tainted from good dragon eggs that have been turned into these evil mutant hybrid, kind of not quite dragonborn, but kind of a similar idea. Except they're created through evil magic. Although later books do a cool thing where not all Draconians are evil. They do a really cool twist with having some ones that are like, nah, screw this whole war thing. They kind of come out of it on the other side. Kind of like the Bad Batch for Star Wars equivalent. But I think Draconians are really fun and a really neat stat block, and there's enough variety there where they make a compelling enemy that you will see frequently throughout the campaign. So over 70 NPC character sheets and tokens, and then plus 30 named NPCs, almost all of which have some really great artwork to go with it. We also get over 25 player art handouts, which are all these located at the end. Basically, any image from the book has been ripped out as a player art handout, which are all very cool. You can blow them up. They all look freaking awesome. We also get over 50 magic item handouts, with 30 of them having art, which is this section right here. This is pretty recognizable from anybody who's played any of the official campaign adventures. You'll get a whole bunch of magic items, which you can give to your players, and most of them have official artwork. You also get the Dragonlance compendium, which the compendium just means it adds all the new stuff into your Roll20, I'm going to call it a database or vault, but I mean, compendium is their word for it, where you can essentially add anything that they add from the compendium into your games, no matter what game you're playing. So, for example, they add the Kender race, which is just slightly tweaked halflings, essentially. But that's an official race option, and now you can bring into your other games through the character monster or just having that information read in the compendium. They also add a new subclass, which is the Lunar Sorcerer subclass. I guess we could actually look for it in here. The Kender's almost not worth mentioning. I mean, it's got this kind of cute little taunting type ability that you can yell at people with, which feels appropriate. The Lunar Sorcerer is pretty awesome. I actually really, really like that subclass. I think it feels very well designed. Let's see if I can find it. Is there a link? Hopefully, yes. There we go. Where it's based on the 3 moons of Kryn, which they have a big thing where you can either be a black robed mage, a red robed mage, or a white robed mage, and it's literally like a good, neutral, or evil aligned. And then you're tied to those kind of spells that you're basically using. And then as a Lunar Sorcerer, you can really swap between all 3 different moons as you long rest, and then you get different abilities and different spells, and all that feels just very cool and gives the player some kind of active ability to kind of tweak their own build just on a rest. You also get 2 new backgrounds, and these are actually legitimately awesome to where I wish they had done more with this. And frankly, I wish this is how backgrounds had been designed from 5e to begin with. I don't know if I can actually click on... Crap, the actual hyperlinks are for Knight of Solamnia, Mage of Hyacinth. Okay, maybe we can go to it from here. Click on backgrounds, or does that lead me to background? No, at least a generic backgrounds. Shoot. See, this is, I don't know, Dragonlance, if we can get there. Okay, here we go. So it takes a couple steps, so it's a little bit of a finicky system. You kind of have to know your way around the hyperlink system. But essentially, they add the Knight of Solamnia and the Mage of High Sorcery, which are both awesome because they are very reflective of what's going on in the world. Like, all spellcasters have to be part of the this magic guild, essentially, that doles out the robes and has you be an official spellcaster. And then as a marshal, you can... Knighthood is very traditional, like chivalrous, honorable knight, and the Knights of Solamnia are that faction. But the cool thing is, not only is this in the story, where it's like matters if you're part of those backgrounds and you actually progress through your background, through the context of the story, but you gain like bonus feats that you can choose from at different leveling tiers. It's really well designed. It's really cool. It feels very compelling to the point where I would highly recommend players take advantage of one, if not both, of these backgrounds. But unfortunately, I think the DM would then have to create also compelling backgrounds for everybody in terms of having like mechanical and story benefits, because those two are so good and so well interwoven into the story. It kind of sucks for like, well, I want to be a cleric, or I want to be just a rogue who's not a knight, but who's a martial fighter. They don't have the equivalent. So it's still a very positive for me, but I can see why it sucks that we only get these two, and they're very specific, character archetypes and builds, and it kind of leaves out certain other characters. But it's a really, really cool idea. I actually really love these backgrounds. And then we get the Shadow of the Dragon Queen art pack, which I meant to have this saved in my art gallery. Oh, good, it's still there. So this is ridiculous. We don't usually get this many with any of the products included, but essentially what Roll20 does is pull all of the NPC art from, all of the just portrait art from all of the artwork from the book, and then turn it into tokens. And then they give you a bunch of tokens and a bunch of handouts. But here they went absolutely crazy. Like, we get everything that even thinks about including some kind of creature that could be a token is a token here. There are over 200 of these. And then they're given as this token style, and then, which is kind of what we've been seeing in 5e for a while, and then this blue token background, and then up above we get all of these as just straight up handouts that players can use. But literally anything that appears as a even if it's like some random composite shot, of this like elf child or something, like that's a token. Like, it's really above and beyond what I expect from the token pack to include. So that's freaking awesome. So that's all the stuff that you get. All right. We've kind of talked about the source book part of the adventure and the fact that it's almost not even there. It's hardly worth talking about. Again, if you were looking at being excited about this, saying, okay, what are they going to do to sell me on Krynn? It's gonna have to be this adventure, because the actual source book part is not really anything to talk about. And the fact that even in Roll20, it's like you have to click on these hyperlinks to get a little bit of information is about all you get. So we're going to start talking about the adventure. Chapter 2 kicks off with such a cool freaking idea. It's called Prelude to War, and we've talked about how level 1 I've talked about specifically, if you watched my stuff, how level 1 is just kind of bullshit, right? It's like a tutorial level. Like, if anybody has any experience with D&D, you can just skip level 1, go to level 2. So what are we doing at level 1? Well, this actually does a pretty good thing to do at level 1, which is create little miniature kind of solo ventures that connect the players into the world through 3 specific different preludes that you can run. One of them is designed specifically for a cleric, possibly a paladin type character, but somebody with a, who's clearly following a god. Because the problem in the Dragonlance world up to then is the gods basically left the world. There have been no clerics. Like, it's just been a godless world after this big cataclysm happened. And now the War of the Lance begins with the gods starting to come back. And unfortunately starts with Takhisis coming back, and she's, launching this huge conquering world. So what do you do if a player wants to play that cleric? Do you just say, no, you can't, because that's kind of tied to the story? Well, you could run this really cool prelude that's basically this supernatural event as the player is sort of has this divine meeting with their chosen deity, and then they gain their they don't start with their powers, but by the end of this prelude they gain their like first level cleric powers. It's very, very cool and very well done. We get similar ones for Eye in the Sky and Scales of War. Eye in the Sky is specifically to set up for anybody who's going to be in the Mage of High Sorcery. So it sets up with like kind of initial trial meeting with this like invisible maze, and then Scales of War just is kind of for everybody else really who's not a arcane or divine spellcaster, and you just have a chance meeting with a bunch of draconians. And obviously level 1 you're supposed to be like sneaking past them, and there's not meant to be like session wide things. These are like really mini, almost cutscenes or events where the players have like maybe 1 or 2 skill checks or have to figure something out. Again, very well done, kind of similar to the backgrounds, where I almost wish we had multiples of these, but at least Scales of War can function for, and really the others can all function for multiples too. It just, if you got 2 different clerics, they can have this same thing and go together and just, experience different deities. But what a cool way to tie the players into the world and also provide just a neat background and a cool start to this adventure. So huge thumbs up for Chapter 2. And then Chapter 3 provides a good excuse for why those characters together, which is the death of a mutual friend, essentially. There's a funeral. They've all been sent invitations to go meet with this, to attend their old friend's funeral, and in this small town called Vulgar. So I'm going to go ahead and, just for funsies, we're going to go to the map, which this is the poster map that's included in the book, which folds out and is absolutely humongous. It's got some cool cities. You look at this map, you go, oh man, I can't wait to get, learn more about Kryn and this world, and just, what all we can explore here, and how much is is this adventure going to cover? I'm going to draw a box over how much this adventure covers in terms of land. Ready? It's right there. The entire level 1 through 11 campaign takes place within this box. So that's disappointing if you are, again, looking to explore more of the Dragonlance world and really take advantage of this cool setting. On the other hand, though, it does allow for a very tightly woven, driven narrative where you really care about these reoccurring allies and rivals and villains in a degree that you would lose if you did more of the Storm King's Thunder thing, where you were, bouncing around all these huge locations. So it's kind of a give or take, and thankfully you do have it does open up at some point. It does start kind of excessively linear, which is here in this tiny town of Vulgar, which is the first chapter. It's actually Chapter 3 by the time we get to that part. But it basically starts with a kind of, I gotta go quickly. So mock battle turns into a real battle, and then you end up finding the Red Dragon army, and you have to flee Vulgar, which is actually the really cool final scenario here. You can see this is the handout of the map. We'll go to the actual map here in a second. And then you flee to the nearby city of Kalaman, which becomes your main staging ground city. And from there, you're still kind of on a very linear adventure for the most part until things open up in Chapter 5. But I'm going to give you an example of what the battle map art looks like. I think it looks really awesome. And they do a unique thing here where, let's see, is it, I guess, Invasion of Vulgar we can look at, where they have this kind of weird border, which is called the Fray. And this is something you will see frequently. See if it would say it in here. Escape from Vulgar. Here we go, the Fray. So, because Dragonlance is a war-themed fantasy world, often the players are directly involved in a war going on around them. But how do you do that in a tabletop game where the players control a few characters and the DM has to control everything else? Well, I think this does a pretty clever way of doing that by abstracting all of the surrounding war stuff with this border of danger called the Fray. And it's literally just whatever danger is happening around you, whatever the outer battle is. If anybody goes near it, you just start taking dex saves or you take damage. And also through these events. So all these scenes that have battles within larger battles have these battlefield events where you might have, a villain come stumbling in, ready to fight, but it's, damaged. You might have a volley of arrows shooting at the players. I really like the one where a blinded Bozak Draconian with 1 hit point staggers from the Fray and across the battlefield. It doesn't attack, but it explodes in its death throes if killed, because all the Draconians have death throws, which essentially like methods if you're used to D&D 5e. They all have unique death throws. Some of them might petrify and have your weapons lodged in them. Others may just explode. Some of them turn into a chain lightning spell. Others, they like appear as a ghostly image appears and frightens everybody. But they all have a cool, unique death throw that happens, which makes them really fun combatants that the party has to deal with, especially the first time they face each one. And they're like, all right, what the fuck does this one do when it dies? I think that was a really clever way of doing that. And you will see it repeated, not everywhere, but, in a lot of these situations, the party's in the middle of this, battle within a war. So they're still fighting these individual battles. You can still do your cool little, turn-based tactical battles that mean something. But then in the wider war, it's happening all around them. So I thought that does a really clever job of making that happen. But up until throughout chapter 3 and chapter 4, it is very linear. It's very story based. You meet a lot of interesting people. There's like a Joffrey type rival the players have to deal with, which I thought was a really smart play. Although good luck keeping that character and or his dad alive, because characters often get really, really pissed at these villainous NPC sorts. And they're reacting to things. They're, helping with the politics of Kalaman, trying to, deal with this army approaching and what the hell do they want. And you're, just having all these little skirmishes. And then finally, you also get a really cool event with Lord Soth, which is as you return from one event, you actually get a lot of cutscenes with him. I want to make a special shout out to Lord Soth. So Lord Soth is really kind of a Darth Vader-esque a character in the Dragonlance lore. Just a really compelling villain with like a tragic backstory and, super powerful. Kind of can go by his own rules. Doesn't necessarily he's allied with the Red Dragon army at the start of this, but doesn't necessarily serve Queen Tuckus. He's got his own deal. So, and normally when we see these kind of powerful villains in a lot of the 5e adventure campaigns, I don't think they're very well used. Like they may show up at the very end of the campaign, or when we finally face them as player characters, something has to happen for the players to be able to fight them, because clearly, all these threats like a Serac or Iamreth, like they're not meant to be faced by, level 12 players or level 11 or whatever they are that, players finally get to that point. So they do all these little cheaty things at the end of the campaign to let you fight them. Lord Soth appears in some really cool ways throughout this campaign. You learn more about his story, his backstory, and then when you finally, and he's technically only one of several like big bads, and then when you do finally face him, there's like other role-playing things you can do, kind of similar to, the way, for example, Luke defeats Darth Vader in the end by not fighting him, right? Like, I'm not saying you don't literally say like, oh, I see good in you or anything. That's not what happens here. It's not like a total ripoff of that. But I will say that by exploring his backstory and doing other things, like rewarding story things, or ways you can at least temporarily deal with Lord Soth without just resorting to straight combat that actually makes sense in the context of the story. So that part is all really cool and really satisfying. And he's only one of like several big bads at the end. You end up fighting like this giant death dragon, and then this one general who rides a dragon at the end. Like, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's a really cool, exciting, and I really like the way they use the villains. And not only just Lord Soth, there's other villains as well who pop up and reoccur, as well as there's NPC allies. There's this one, I forget his name, but he's like a little squire who joins your party as really an NPC hanger-on, and then he eventually becomes like commander of the army. Like, he works his way up the ranks. There's just a lot of really great ways they can reoccur NPCs, because it all takes place within essentially the same area. That being said, it does feel very, very linear up until we get to chapter 5. And finally, at the end of chapter 4, we finally get our first legit dungeon crawl. And yes, we made it this long without one. And it's kind of even then a very story-based dungeon crawl, if anything. And we have the big cutscene with Lord Soth, and we kind of realize like what the main plot is, which we don't really learn until chapter 5. And this is the chapter that really made me fall in love with this campaign, where things really open up. And essentially, it becomes like an Indiana Jones story, where the enemy, the Nazi army, is after some ancient weapon that they're going to use in their war, and it's up to our plucky adventurers to stop them. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to stop the entire Nazi army. You're just going to stop this one terrible thing from falling into the enemy's hands. Although, even then, they do twist things a little bit by essentially allowing a part of it to fall into the enemy's hands at the end, and then you have to deal with this big, awesome climactic battle. But when you first have to chase after Lord Soth and the Red Dragon army as they're heading to the Northern Wastes, it opens up to this big exploration chapter. So suddenly we go from, pretty tightly woven, we're reacting to things, we've got a very strong narrative, but we don't have a lot of maybe choices, to all of a sudden we're opening up at least this hex crawl area. Each of these hexes is worth 6 miles, and yes, everything is scaled correctly. And each of these locations is a full location with a full colored battle map, and you start off only knowing a couple of them, but they do a great job of, you might get you might meet the elves when you first land on Wrecker's Edge, and then they'll send you to the Elven encampment at Exile's Edge, and those elves will tell you, okay, well, here's these 3 other locations we've been checking out, because they're trying to find the same thing. You go to like one of those locations, and then you might say, oh, but our people have been captured by these other people, and that'll lead you to another location, and then that person will lead you home to their location, and that home will lead you to another location. Really, really well done in terms of seeding and making it feel like the players are gaining all these quests. It's very classic, just open world adventure goodness, I think. It's just absolutely great setting and mixture, and I think it's awesome. I really love this chapter to death, and there's a town built on a crater. Like, how fucking cool is that? And then it all culminates with you finding this lost city. Now, yes, D&D is getting a little bit much with the Lost City angle. It's funny because I ran Tomb of Annihilation, I'm running Rime of the Frost Maiden right now, and I may run Dragonlance next. All 3 of these feature a lost city, but you know what? They're all fucking cool. It's an angle that I like. It's very classic adventure-y. It's kind of classic D&D in a lot of ways. The Lost City works really, really well. It features a very cool dungeon crawl. It's ties to the past in Dragonlance, which you don't have to know the context of all, but it's basically this city that fell during the cataclysm. And then you think you stop it, like you think you discover their plan is to raise this entire city, because it used to be this flying city, a huge, powerful thing built on like the souls of dragons, and was part of the initial army that this empire was going to use. And you think you stop them from happening, and all of a sudden this fortress to the south, which the party can see but has not been able to get to yet, rises up on its own and then goes and joins the main army. So you think, oh shit, we thought we just stopped everything, but now we've got this other thing to fucking deal with, and that becomes the crazy awesomeness that is Chapter 7. You hurry back to Calaman. You have to help them defend against this. Look at how awesome this looks. Like a fucking flying fortress with these, just mounted dragons coming at you. And then you have to mount this counterattack into the flying citadel. You can see this excellent map here. You sneak your way inside. You go through this undercool dungeon crawl and finally meet up with the Lord Soth himself, who's like powering the whole thing. And then there's all these epic boss battles. It's just so damn cool. It sticks the landing very well. It starts strong, it ends strong. Like, it just checks so many boxes. There's some great role-playing moments with a lot of different characters and villains and allies and rivals. A lot of good storytelling moments and really fun chances for exploration. I think that's what these Lost Cities really do very well. Also, is give you that, give the players a chance to explore on their own while still having like, individual areas are still detailed. So like the Temple of Paladine, Threshold of Heavens, and Occupied Mansion, those are all different maps that we get. Like, it's not like these are just, hey, adventure location ideas. Like, no, these are legit like battle maps that we have in Roll20. Speaking of which, I haven't forgotten, I'm going to show you what it looks like when we have, so a normal battle map that is normal scaled will look like this. This is a 5-foot scale battle map. Everything is tied to dynamic lighting. If you want to see what that looks like, we can show you. Give one of these dudes some vision, possibly some night vision, and then you can see what they see. Give me a second. There we go. So this is what it looks like to essentially the players as they're walking around this map, and you can see the dynamic lighting. Things are on the GM layer if they're supposed to be hidden. All of that is done correctly and looks great. The difference becomes on these maps which are halved, and that's what this is. So this is an example of a 5-foot scale battle map, but all the grid sizes have been halved, which allows the map to be shrunken in half because it's just a big ass map. It's an interesting trade-off because, on the other hand, if this were twice as big, you would have to be scrolling around like crazy, right? And trying to find everything, because this doesn't really have, that one that I just showed you, it's a relatively tiny map, but this one, it's not. It's pretty big size. This one is, let's see, like 100 feet across. It's a straight up keep. On the other hand, everything's a little bit tinier, so you kind of have to zoom in a little bit if you want to get that same effect. And as I'm zooming in, you can see you kind of lose a little bit with the texture. And actually, the token numbers don't scale very well either when I do that. So I'm kind of torn on it. I actually don't mind having the giant maps to scroll around in. Unfortunately, if you want to fix it yourself, you can just right click and double the dimensions of the map, or change and then change the grid size to full. But on the other hand, you're going to lose all of this, which is the dynamic lighting layer, which does not double if you go to the map layer. So you'd have to redo all the dynamic lighting. Now, this takes place when the one-way walls has been upgraded, so you can put somebody up here and they can see down, but you can't see up into here. But this is not when you have doors. So this was before the door upgrade, so these are just regular things you have to individually open and close like this. Now in Roll20, they have since added the ability to just literally place doors and windows everywhere. That is something that I don't think they're going to add this as a patch or anything. I think it's just up to us as DMs running this later after this update has been in place that you can add all these doors and windows if you wanted to, which I would probably look at doing that because I think it's a really cool feature that Roll20 has added. But that's an example of what it looks like. To me, it's not necessarily a pro or a con. It's just different. It's something I haven't seen them do before, I don't think, where they take a regular 5-foot map and actually have it and scale it down. I know a lot of people maybe have problem with maps loading, taking a long time to load, and for people's browsers and stuff, it can slow things down. So by having it, it probably speeds up that process by a bit. And I don't think this particularly looks as bad as a 10-foot scale battle map with tiny tokens. I don't. It probably is similar looking, but to me, it's not quite the end of the world. But it is something I wanted to comment on, just so you know, when you're looking at some of these maps and you go, well, wait a minute, I thought they were all 5 foot. Like, yeah, they are still, but some of them are a little bit smaller. This is another one I think that's the tinier size, Walk and Wrath. There's only a handful. Most of them are properly, I think Camp Carrion Clay is the one that's tiny sized. Yeah, but you can see the difference here, and then something that's normal is probably this one. So obviously everything's way, way bigger. So just kind of a flavor thing that I don't know if I have much pro or con on to begin with, but man, overall, this is already a long review and I've been gushing about it, but it's all I can do to gush about it. I think the entire story works very well. I think the overall the way the war battles work very well. I love all the characters and what they do. I love that even though it starts off linear, which is a bummer that it's really too linear at the beginning, it does open up, and I think I think that's level 5 or 6 when you go to the Northern Wastes. Starting from there and then on, I think the adventure is just awesome and runs on all cylinders and never really falters. So all of kind of unfortunately the worst parts of the adventure all take place in the beginning, and then it just gets really, really awesome from there. And it's fantastic. It really is cool, and it nails kind of that Indiana Jones feel that I was looking for, which is, hey, yes, this takes place in a war, during a war, and yet we are not necessarily soldiers in that war. We are adventurers. So what's their excuse for adventuring? And I think having the army try to find this ancient, essentially weapon buried somewhere, which again feels very much like a, classic Indiana Raiders of the Lost Ark, especially. It fits very, very well thematically, and it works really well for me. And as a Dragonlance fan, I think it reflects Dragonlance very well. Obviously, I'm disappointed that we only look at a small, teeny, tiny slice, and I think you're going to have to go again to the DM's Guild for something like the Dragonlance Companion if you want to get more from this world and more adventures. And it's also a bummer that it does the same thing all 5e campaign adventures does, which is end at level 11, like right when the players are starting to get really strong and powerful, and like they've already like saved this whole region, and then it's done. Like it's so annoying that we can't do more with that. And with my Rhyme campaign, I've expanded things to where the players, can reach those higher levels, and that's been more work for me as the DM. But it's, I think, been a lot really satisfying for the players to be able to reach higher levels of power instead of just running, being done at whatever it is, 10 or 11. Like I do find that pretty disappointing. All right, let's go over my pros and cons. I can stick on this map if you like, or I could show some other stuff. I might stick here for now. For this entire campaign, pro, several opening solo ventures that tie the PCs into the world. Those are the preludes. I say solo venture, but you can obviously use multiples because there's only 3, so you're gonna have to probably double up on some. But I love how it starts off with these. I think every single campaign should use these in some way, which is basically like cinematic events, which are very handholdy and railroady, but they're designed to just focus on those few characters, and they tie them into the world, give you just a few skill checks, and represent like, hey, this is you at level 1, and then by the end of it, you're level 2. Like that, yes, that works absolutely very, very well. And these ones in particular, I think, are well designed and work very well, especially as an excuse for like, wait, why do clerics still work? And that's because, and that could be a big, cool deal to where I would very much recommend somebody play a cleric in this campaign adventure. At least one person play a mage, they can do the high sorcery thing, and then at least one person be the knight, so that you can do the Knight of Solamnia background, which goes into my another pro, which is the new backgrounds are woven into the story and reward new feats. Huge thumbs up. It's a bummer we only have 2 of them, and they're so specifically tied to certain character archetypes, but they are both really, really well done backgrounds that I wish all backgrounds were that good. Like, they're just well tied into the story, and they've got their own cool feats that you can unlock and play with. Pro Draconians are awesome, and Big Bad Lord Soth features prominently in the story. This is an entire token page where you can see all the different monsters. You can obviously just drag them from the actual adventure. So if I want to take, here's Darret Highwater is the name of the little plucky young dude that you can grab and progresses through the ranks, and it literally just appears on there with all the things ready to go. He's got his hit points, armor class in the blue. But if you want to copy and paste or just see what the token size looks like, you can go to this page and see everything. And I really love the Draconians specifically. I think they're very well designed. I mean, the Aurak Draconian alone, which is the only one that can't fly, which most of them can glide like gargoyle style, has awesome spells available. He's got at will invisibility. He can cast Dimension Door and Disguise Self to be able to escape any situation, and Dominate Person. Has a bit of a breath attack he can do, and when he dies, he basically casts like a low-level version of Chain Lightning. Like, fucking hell, that's so good. Now, it's a CR6, so you're not going to throw this at everybody, but the important thing is you can keep using Draconians kind of like you were using Star Wars, like, Stormtrooper variants with, like, the, I don't know, different kinds of Stormtroopers. So you've got, like, your really shitty ones, but then you've got maybe your better ones as you go along, all the way to where you're using, like, you know, Fifth Sister or whatever the Star Wars thing is. So, like, they're the Jedi Hunters. So it's I think it's really cool to be able to use different flavors of Draconians, and they all feel very satisfying to run. And Lord Soth and the villains are really a blast, and I think Soth is probably one of the best villains since Strahd. I'm going to go ahead and say that right now. I think Lord Soth, as written in this campaign, that's not saying much, granted, I get that, but I think probably overall the best villain since Strahd. Maybe Waterdeep Dragon Heist did some cool stuff with their characters too, but I just didn't like that campaign for various reasons, so I'm going back to Strahd. Pro reoccurring NPCs and rival allies provide meaningful attachments to the story. Pretty much what I've been saying the whole time. I just really like all the characters that are in here, and I think that's a positive to running in a very single place, having basically just one city that you're working with, so you end up seeing those same characters throughout every single chapter and end up forming some real attachments to them. Pro, nearly 20 gorgeous battle maps, all of them with 5-foot squares. They all have proper scaling. The exception being that there are some that kind of have that distance, so it gets a little bit different to work with, but I cannot say enough good things about how this map art looks, and I've been just super thrilled with how everything appears, and the art style is right up there with the best that I've seen from probably Tomb of Annihilation was the last time. I mean, Rime had some good map art too. But just the way it all looks, the way it comes together, there's some decent variety, probably not as much as you would see in a lot of other campaigns, because again, you've got limited areas that you're going to, but just the fact that the climax is in this fucking flying fortress that has a dungeon crawl, and there's others with the Lost City, and there's these, you know, huge open wastes, which, by the way, that northern waste area is like, it floods every like once in a while, so you've got all these weird like sea creatures that can appear in there, and then you have to deal with flash flooding. Like, just all of that's very, very cool. And pro, over 200 tokens taken from every piece of art in the book. I just huge pro to the art gallery, like absolutely above and beyond when it comes to the amount of token art that you have that you can use. Or some of these are already used for creatures, but a lot of them could be used for PCs, NPCs, like whatever you need. I always forget about these too. I'm very guilty of this, but you can just go to this art gallery and grab, you know, any of these random pieces of art and use that for whatever just art. I mean, like this, the fucking statue of Enchant. There's 2 different pieces of the statue. If you wanted to use that as an art token for whatever reason, like that's cool. Like, just give me those options, and I, as the DM, can decide whether or not that's worth my time to use or not. I do have some cons. I do have some criticisms for as positive as I have been. One of my cons is that the first few chapters, basically, which is chapters 3 and 4, are excessively linear and lack dungeon crawling. I think dungeon crawling is a lot of times the solution to opening up when things feel too linear or too railroady. Because if you have a decent size, it doesn't take much of it, a decent sized dungeon, you give control to the players. They feel like they're moving around, they're doing stuff, they're interacting with doors and traps and hazards and lore and fighting monsters. It just, like, the dungeon crawl is just works so well, and that's why it's a big feature of D&D. And unfortunately, we don't get any of that in Chapter 3, and only one towards the end of Chapter 4, and even then it's a pretty linear, story-based dungeon. That's the ruined raided catacombs event. It's not until Chapter 5 when things finally open up into that hex crawl that things finally open up, and then we get some kind of mini dungeon crawls in any of those, and then probably your first big one isn't until Chapter 6 with the Path of Memories. So if you really enjoy dungeon crawling, like Prince of the Apocalypse or things like that, you're probably not going to get as much of that here. I think, unfortunately, it's to the detriment of this campaign. They really could have done with just a very simple low level, at least one good low level, if it's just an optional dungeon. That's probably something I would look at adding if I were running this campaign, for something in the beginning, just to help break it up between all these different events that the players are dealing with. Would have gone really a long way for me. And then my other con is that it only covers levels 1 through 11, and you're limited to a very small space of Ansalon. I've already mentioned there are pros to that. Like I said, you get to a lot of the same NPCs and a lot of those connections, but unfortunately for this, cool world that has so much history and so much in just stuff you can do in so many locations. For example, like the dwarves, you don't ever basically see hardly any dwarves or don't really function with them. The elves show up a little bit, which is nice. There's one or two things with gnomes. There's basically nothing with Kender. So you don't really get like that cool. It doesn't provide the showcase of Krynn that I necessarily wanted to see, although it does provide a good showcase of the war and the themes that Krynn can offer. So I think we are having. It feels a little bad to have this limited zone, and I think that I like the way the campaign's structured. I guess I wanted more. Give me a few more chapters where we're in tier 3 and maybe we have to go to the surrounding world and really deal with things, but that's fortunately just never quite going to be the case with these 5e campaigns, apparently. All right, final verdict. While it fails at being a proper sourcebook for Krynn, Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen more than makes up for it with its tightly compelling, war-torn story, well-conceived NPCs and villains, and a wonderful balance of combat, exploration, and role-playing, creating one of the best adventures for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I am declaring it right now. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at rogue.watson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel and support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, William, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, David, Corey, Coa1337, Matthew, Big Nut, John, Infernus, Chris, Scott, and Gene. And gold patrons RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Deadless, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fastica, Tortoise, Scott, Refus, Caroline, and William. Thank you all very much for your support.